Okay, Michael's gonna go and make sure the mayor's coming in.
Okay, they're just ready. Yeah, they're ready for it.
I thought it was Frank first.
Yeah, it took 3 minutes. She's on her way.
She's on her way.
Thank you.
Get on with you. I can't find.
Sal has joined.
Just
Morning, Sal.
You did, okay, thanks.
I gotta get my computer up and running.
Good morning, congratulations.
Yeah, I'll be happy when the recount's over.
Okay, I think we're set. The mayor just came in.
Great. Well, good morning to all of you. The first item for the City of West Haven is the subcommittee update for today. I'd like to first highlight what the random update of the CRM audit reported in the last meeting. OPM has contracted with Home Resnick to conduct an audit of the city's use of the coronavirus relief fund. Home Resnick has delivered to the city its initial request for documentation and provided the city with a portal to have all documents uploaded. I want to remind West Haven that it is critically important that the city be responsive to Code Resnick. We need to avoid delays in providing the requested information. Code has had to follow up at least one time to seek documents. It is my understanding that a number of documents were uploaded to the portal as of yesterday afternoon, and Code is beginning to review. There is a full written subcommittee update was provided in the meeting materials that you have before you today. In our October subcommittee, there was a discussion on a comprehensive report of the fire district, and there was also discussion on various open items, including vacant positions and the memorandum of agreement, which we will discuss in further detail in the next agenda item. The next subcommittee is scheduled for November 16th. Ms. Henson or Mr. Fraud, is there anything else that you'd like to provide in terms of subcommittee updates for West Haven? Nothing from me, Secretary. Thank you. I'll discuss it now. Okay. You'll discuss it in the next item. Any questions with regard to the subcommittee update for West Haven?
So, David Miller, I do have a question. I don't know if it's a subcommittee, more of a question for, wanted to find out. I did see that, I think somewhere over the course of the last couple of days, I saw in the news that there was a lease, the West Haven property, the shoreline was leased out to a brewery. First of all, obviously, congratulations to the city of West Haven. I think it's great to bring business in. I'm just curious, for my own information, is that something that will eventually come before us? The circumstances of the lease or
We'll have to follow with the city of Lyme. I mean, we do have a statutory requirement to review contracts that are greater than a certain value. We'll probably need a little bit more detailed contractual arrangement.
Yeah.
Answer your question.
Yeah, I don't really have much detail on it. I saw a blurb, I don't know if it was on the news or the register or somewhere about that, that the former municipal building, I think over on the shoreline, was demolished and rebuilt, and I think that a brewery was relocating there from Woodbridge, which was fantastic. I'm just curious if that obviously is something that ends up coming before us at some point for review and approval. I don't know.
We'll do some files with West Haven. Mayor Frank, you are here on the line if there's anything you want to provide in terms of comment on that particular arrangement.
Mayor?
I don't know if they can. Can you hear me okay? I was having trouble getting on team. What did you want, an update? What's the?
Mayor, Mr. Diller is inquiring about a lease for a brewery that has moved into the city, and an update on that particular endeavor, and was that, is that reflected in a contractual agreement? Is that something that you're in the process of submitting to MARB?
Okay, we haven't gotten that far yet. They have to go before the city council to get approval on Monday night before we go forward with anything, and then the lease would be drawn up. And yes, if it's required to go under MARB, we absolutely would bring it before them. Before all of you, not.
Very good. So David, we'll do some follow-up offline with David to ensure that the MARB receives a copy of the documentation and evaluate whether or not we need to be coming for the MARB, and if so, it would be reflected in the next subcommittee and at the next full meeting.
Fantastic, thank you very much, thank you, Mayor.
You're very welcome. Any other questions or discussions on the subcommittee update from us, David? All right, seeing that, we will move on to the update on the fiscal 2021 memorandum of agreement. Members will recall that the city has been asked consistently at monthly subcommittee meetings about how it will comply with various requirements in the MOA. We have at least the last 2 financial audits that identify internal control weaknesses in a number of areas. 2018-19 audit had approximately 16 findings. Approximately 7 of those findings were closed down, and their following year audit, fiscal 19-20, included about 7 to 8 findings. The city has repeatedly been pushed to fill key positions in the finance department. This is required by section 12 of the memorandum of agreement between the Office of Policy Management and the City of West Haven. We have consistently requested updates in each of the subcommittee meetings on the city's corrective action plan and progress on resolving the audit findings that's required in the MOA under sections 8 and 9. We've also addressed directly with the city training issues with the city's financial system. This is a requirement based on section 7 of the MOA. You will recall in one of my prior reports that a letter was sent from myself to the city of West Haven on September 17th, again and again, and in the October subcommittee meeting, this was addressed, directing the city to provide a plan for closing out the remaining open memorandum of agreement items. The city did select a collection of attachments that you have in your meeting materials today related to the MOA and various action plan items. However, none of these documents address a plan, a date when we can expect the items to be locked down, and confirmation of execution. And so I need to make it very clear today that part of the code revenue audit, as I previously indicated, will look at the extent to which internal control weaknesses contributed to any misuse of funds if that is defined. Therefore, the continued lack of compliance with these items does put the MOA in jeopardy, because that is a requirement in the agreement in order for the state to provide municipal resources. To be very, very clear, internal control weaknesses opens the city up for misuse. When segregation of duties type issues are present that are linked to exact staffing, that can contribute to the financial operations not running smoothly. These are the types of inquiries that we have been on record inquiring about in our subcommittee meeting. So the next step for the city of West Haven, which we've consistently been requesting and is reflected in our subcommittee meetings, which are public meetings, is that the city must compile each open item into a reporting format that describes what steps they're going to take, what positions they need to hire, when they're going to commit to making those hires, and the deadline by which these items will be locked down. So that is the update with respect to the MOA and compliance. And at this point, I will open it up for any discussion.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Bosse.
Good morning, everybody. After following some of the issues that have been going on, and since I've been on this, to echo what you just read, spoke about, I've been on this committee, we have been talking to West Haven about the lack of updates, the lack of compliance. going forward, I would find it very, very difficult, and I think that the MARB as a whole should halt any funds going to West Haven until these audits are complete, and we know what the findings are, and the lack of fiscal employment acting in the town needs to be shored up so that any going forward, we don't have the same issues or potential issues that we also see.
Madam Secretary, Bob White, I saw that opinion piece in the paper suggesting a linkage between the delay by the city in implementing the findings and potential misuse of funds. And I'm pleased that the Cone resident is going to be looking at that. I just think if Cone resident does find that they were related, that is very, very serious. And it undercuts a lot of progress that West Haven has made in the last couple of years. That would be a real body blow, and I'm pleased they're looking at it. And I agree with your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Madam Chair, Matt Egan, maybe this is a question for Frank, but just in kind of looking at the ongoing reason. My question is who in West Haven, besides the CFO, has authority to approve expenditures and things like that? Is there anybody, I mean, I know under the charter, those things are generally authorized by, I believe it's, would be Frank and the town treasurer. Is there anybody else, regardless of whether it's, COVID grant money or anything else that's been given authority to green light these expenditures or reimbursements?
Yeah, all the department heads are responsible for reviewing any bills that are incurred by their department. So the process is currently, once an invoice is received, once a bill is received, the department head or his or her agent will sign off on payment of that invoice with the assumption by finance being that it has been reviewed and that the services or the products have been delivered. It then comes up to finance as long as there is a signature on the form. There are charge numbers on where to apply the cost, and the values match between the invoice and the approval. At that point, finance signs off on actually having AP cut the check.
Okay, so with the remaining, any remaining COVID funds, is there anybody but you, Frank, who has the authority to kind of green light what expenses were incurred?
No,
I know that, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Because I know that you had that authority, but I know Representative DeMassa was given that authority by a resolution submitted to the town council by Mayor Rossi, which they approved, I believe, unanimously.
That's correct.
On December 28th of 2020.
That is correct. So a number of the bills that were submitted by Representative DeMassa would have been under the same assumptions as any other department head or agent, that he had reviewed them and approved of them and then sent it on. So it would have been any bills that normally would not have come up through the other department heads. So if something got ordered by social services or the health department, those bills may have gone up to Representative DeMassa. He was coordinating a number of the invoices that came through for payment.
So did Representative DeMassa have the sign a check?
No,
Because there's something in the paper, I don't know how true it is, that there was a turnover of 1 day. And the one thing I've noticed by being on this commission is that in the private world, you can write a check and have it delivered in 1 day. But in the public forum, especially in cities, it takes forever to get a check through a system. So it's just interesting and to me, how, and if that 50 reporting is correct, how a check of that size was turned over in 24 hours.
so as long as,
The level of detail that our code enforcement auditors are going to go in, as well as delve into when there are conflicts of interest with a signatory authority, all of that will be rigorously reviewed in exhaustive detail. I want to be mindful that we have a federal investigation and let that process play out. The report from Code Enforcement will come back to this board so that we can understand, if the allegations are what contributing factors allowed it to happen. So I want to give the board the assurance that specifically these level of details is what the contract with Cone is going to achieve for us.
Mr. Chairman, Chief General, I would just like to echo Mr. Spears that I think there's an investigation ongoing, and I think we're going to have that information. I think speculating or asking questions here is duplicative and time-consuming.
Yeah, it should be time-consuming. I mean, it's $600,000, and it's raising issues of financial control that we've been raising, and the audits have been raising for many years as well.
I know. David Miller. This is David Miller. I just wanted to add a question I think goes along with Mr. Egan. My question is, I understand there's an internal process by which an invoice or bill is submitted, somebody reviews it, it's okay, it's signed off on, it goes to someone else's desk for a check to be written. Is there any tier, this is a general procedural question now, is there any tier of authority by which checks or payments over a certain amount, including to one individual organization with a total of $200, have to go to a higher level of authority for approval just simply based on the dollar amount to check or total payments to any one person or organization? Is there any kind of an internal procedural process based on the amount of dollars?
not that I know of. I have not been able to find any such procedure.
Can I jump in here? Tom Hamilton, I want to, say obviously we're all very concerned and troubled by, the reports here. I do agree with the chair that it's really premature for us to get into a detailed sort of discussion while there is an investigation and an audit. I think we have to wait for the outcome of that audit. Certainly, the board should delve into that report and the recommendations that come out of that report in detail after that report comes out. I do think the issue that was raised earlier in terms of the restructuring funds, perhaps there is some opportunity for further discussion. Personally, I agree that it would be best if the state withholds restructuring funds to balance the 2021 budget or whatever amount may have been planned pending the outcome of this investigation and the outcome of the audit. I don't know whether that's the thinking of the secretary and the others on this board, but that would be my recommendation, would be to withhold any MARB restructuring fund payments until that investigation is concluded.
Thank you, Tom. That is thinking of the secretary, and the contractual language of the MOA supports that unless the city meets the requirements of the MOA, the compliance requirements of the MOA to my satisfaction, then the funds will not be provided. And until we can understand the outcome of this audit and the extent to which these compliance issues contributed, if that is indeed the outcome, It would be premature for any funds to be dispersed, and they will not under my authority. I believe that, Ms. Shaw, you were trying to add something.
Mr. Hamilton captured my sentiments exactly. I think there are very distinct issues, although there could be a common root which relates to the financial control. I would support you, Madam Secretary, and the wisdom of withholding any discretionary funds pending the results of the audit and other investigations.
Thank you, Co-Chair. All right.
Madam Secretary, just
Yeah.
when, Chair, I fully support 100% what you said in terms of withholding the funds. One thing, we have an expected timeline for when the audit is expected to be completed? Because I obviously share all the questions of this board, so just curious sort of what the timeline is, and I want to make sure that that stays on track as much as possible.
Absolutely. I give you our assurance that they're working as quickly as possible. That's why you heard in my remarks, we need the documents, and I'm sure that Frank is working very hard to get those documents provided. I suspect this is at least a 2-month process. I cannot say with urgency. They hold up a good amount of work to do. Most important, we want it to be done comprehensively, and I encourage each of you, if there are certain aspects of this audit that you want to make sure are accounted for, please send them in to Julian so we can ensure that for the scope, everything that has been raised today certainly is. And we'll get it completed. We'll report back to the MARB, and we'll work with the City of West Haven accordingly.
Madam Secretary?
Yes.
So while that review is underway, that external review, it's still would like to know and to see progress on the part of the city to comply with the outstanding items. So we could hear from either Frank or the mayor about how it is they intend to address some of these long-standing issues.
So, yes, good question. So there have been issues for years around the purchasing procedures here in the city. We have contracted with an individual. She was formerly procurement officer for the city of Meriden. She has worked as a consultant with the
A little bit of feedback, so if you could, as one is asking, if you don't go ahead and
Yep, she has consulted for the SCROG. So she has been hired by the city to help me redesign the purchasing process. She sat in with the Zoom meeting that I had with Tyler Technologies to walk the city through how Munis should be working as far as purchasing and accounts payables go. So she is currently in the process of working up boilerplate contracts as well as procedures around RFPs, RFQs, and bids. I have reached out to CCM to get a list of the number of procurement people in various towns in the area. I did receive from them a response on Friday, giving me a dozen towns in the area and the number of people in their procurement organization. Needless to say, they are all higher number of employees than West Haven currently has. That will be addressed in this year's budget. And the contractor, as I said, is helping us to redefine the process around purchasing. I had spoken to department heads a year to a year and a half ago, instructing them that we needed to go to a more robust purchase order process and get away from the manual voucher authorizations. There was some compliance, but not a lot. So what we're going to end up doing is, once we can get the procedures in place, once I can get the training down, we will issue a letter to the vendors that do business with West Haven indicating that unless there is a valid purchase order on the invoice, West Haven will not pay the bill. We would consider that to be a purchase in violation of our policy, unless it is an emergency and has been documented as such. My thinking on that is if we can't get internally the departments to comply, we will force them to comply through their vendors.
I would just like to add another thing, and I totally agree with Frank. As everyone knows, our history when we first got in, and when I first got in 17, as I tell everybody, everything was broken, and one of the things was this purchasing existed one person that half the time was working as the purchasing agent and one half of the time with risk manager. So I am very pleased that, we want to go forward. What I would like to suggest, and maybe bring it forward at the subcommittee meeting, is I agree with Frank, all that he said, except I don't know if we can wait until the next budget, is my concern. This is clearly an issue. I think we all know it's an issue. And I think we should put together a plan and then see if we can locate the money in the budget to pay for these employees, whether we wait until after the investigations are all done, but I think it's something we should start looking at right now. I don't think we should wait until July the 1st. So that's my 2 cents on it. Frank agrees, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm speaking for myself, I agree wholeheartedly. There are positions in your MOA compliance documents that you've indicated for a period of time you'd be filling that have not been filled. So number one, they need to be filled. We need to know what they are, we need to know that the time frame for filling, and then if the staffing is not adequate, then the city should be identifying a funding plan to put the proper positions in place, and even if it means pulling from contingency. So your next step is to identify the resources needed so that you can begin execution immediately and bring that plan back to the subcommittee, so that members see that you're taking actions to address these issues, put the staffing in place, and then build the procedures and policies around it.
The staffing issues in the MOA, with the exception of the accounts payable analyst, have all been filled. The finance has been restructured. We have a new admin in there that's been working wonderfully. We have a floater admin that's assisting the rest of the city departments. So to the only one, the HR generalist is up and we'll be doing interviews. The personnel director came in on October the 18th and has been working since then. And as far as finance, the only one to my knowledge that is not been filled is the AP analyst, but it is been posted. So we are working with the 2 HR generalists and the accounts payable analyst.
Has the AP position been posted yet?
It has been posted.
Yes.
I'm waiting to hear back from personnel to find out if anyone internally has posted for it. I believe that someone did, and I believe that she is qualified and has the credentials. But I'm waiting to get a formal response from personnel. Once that happens, we can get that position filled and move forward with staffing up as we need. One of the issues that I had spoken to Wilma, who is the contractor, is asking her for her guidance and her recommendations as to the number of people and the capabilities of the purchasing department, so that I have enough background and details to be able to support this if there's any pushback.
There should not be any pushback in light of everything that has gone on, and based on the track record and the lack of internal controls, there should be no pushback whatsoever on filling the position. You will not fix your financial infrastructure unless you have the position. And Mayor, I advise that you push forward to get that. I'm sure the Secretary will agree.
Yes.
Is there any way to get a timeline on this? I mean, we've been talking about this forever, all these.
I agree, Stephen.
I mean, this is, I mean, we're going to be here for another 6 months listening that, the process is the process, but you know what? Somebody's got to step up to the plate. Someone's got to make a decision. Someone's got to do this hiring. And you have too many, there's just too many balls in the air that are you can't catch them all at once. And this is where all these problems stem from. They stem from the basic issues that we've been talking about for the last 2 years. This is, it's getting a little tiresome, and at least for me personally. So I really like to have somebody tell me, give me a date. You know what, give me a timeline. You gotta push it a day or two either way, great, or a week, but, come on, huh?
We were given a date.
Your team is going to need to follow up with respect to the hiring and put a timeline together to send to the MARB so that we can see the commitment and that we can track progress against it. Mr. Luciano, were you trying to have a further?
I was. I don't mean to pile on, but this position in terms of having somebody guarding the hen house, that should have been the first person hired. Just to Tim's point and to the chair's point, how can we have any trust at all if you're not hiring the person who's meant to be watching it?
Yeah, I have a question regarding what you raised with the position, saying there's a internal candidate who looks like they'd be qualified.
Miller speaking? That's Pat. Pat,
It
that'll be
is
Pat.
Patty.
We could segment with talking. Go ahead.
Okay. So is there a provision of the collective bargaining agreements or something else that mandates you have to take an internal candidate?
I can't speak to that, I don't know the details around that, but anecdotally, I believe yes. As long as they're qualified.
It's that contractual language, if you guys sure that they get sent over to the MARB. Pat?
I scratch my head sometimes looking at sometimes folks in positions, and then nobody who's on this call. But if there is not something that mandates it, I won't be jumping, and I'm not taking away from whoever this internal candidate is, maybe they're great, but I think sometimes you guys really got to look outside and look at other skill sets and talented people that may be out there before kind of jumping into an internal candidate. That's number one. Number two is the issues with purchase orders. It's been the better part of a few years that the issue of purchase orders, and I believe the purchase order ultimately gets created once you get the invoice, right, Frank?
Yeah, that's the way they're doing it now, and that's what I tried to fix a year ago.
Yeah, so we've been probably talking about that and what a terrible practice it is for the better part of 3 years. And the other, and I'll end off with this so we can move on. But here's one thing, and I remember saying this multiple times about other issues. I just can't get my arms around the concept of when your office or the mayor's office tells department heads that you need to do it this way, and when you say, and we told them they had to do it this way, and the answer is some complied, some didn't. You know what? I just don't get how that works, because I'll tell you what, if I was the boss and you were a department head and you didn't comply, you'd be fired. And if I couldn't fire you for some strange reason, you'd be managed out. I just don't get how a directive can come from the executive branch, the top brass at the executive branch, and it is just disregarded. It really leaves me scratching my head.
Mr. Secretary, Bob wanted a question to follow up. Frank, you've indicated that there's been pushback by department heads to this procedure. What is the reason that they give for the obstruction of something that is fundamentally proper procedure? What do they say?
I don't know that it's direct pushback. I think it's more of a lack of understanding as to why it needs to happen this way. And, you know, fundamentally what I hear is, you know, we can't afford to wait for some things. You know, there's a lot of emergencies. But ultimately, the answer that I seem to get is that's the way we've always done it. And that answer is the single answer that pisses me off more than anything else. You know, I ended up getting pushback when I started, you know, when we lost our purchasing person. So I was helping out, we were creating vendors, and I said, I'm not going to create a vendor without a W-9 and appropriate tax information. Well, you know, that's new. Why do we have to do that? It's policies that...
It's required by law.
It goes back decades. From what I understand, this is a problem that goes back decades. And, you know, I'm trying to chip away at the reason that it needs to happen. You know, we are getting more compliance. If you look at the accounts payable using purchase orders compared to vouchers, the percentages, you know, lately versus what it was 3 years ago, it is showing improvement, but it's not showing improvement fast enough. And part of that is a lack of a proper purchasing department.
Frank,
I would encourage,
Heads accountable for the accountability to proper policies and procedures.
I'm sorry, you were stepped over on the first part of that question.
Yeah, the question on the floor is a confirmation that, you know, that Mayor Rossi, that Frank has your commitment to hold these department heads accountable to comply with city policy. That seems to fundamentally be critical here, so that he does not have the struggle that he's currently engaging in.
No, he absolutely has my commitment, and when I know about it, I have stepped in and sent emails. I discuss it at the department head meetings, and again, if they are not complying with what needs to be done, I agree. Then we have to push back and push back hard. So if it does require, and I hate to use this word, making an example out of someone, then so be it, because we want to move West Haven in the right direction. We absolutely do, and that's what I want, and I think that's what Frank wants, and that's what the residents want. So we will continue.
And it's been going on for the better part of a year and a half or so, according to Frank.
Yeah.
Madam Secretary, I would ask that Code Resnick take a look at, or maybe it's already been done through an audit, but a year and a half worth of pushback on that basis, despite warnings, suggests to me that there is at least a possibility that this system is being used in other untoward ways besides that which has been publicized. And I think we ought to satisfy ourselves whether that is the case. It's been long, and you know, you understand people don't want to change, but after a year and a half on something so basic, my antenna are up.
Mayor,
You'll ensure that is addressed in the scope of services. Before we move on.
I just want to say, Frank and Mayor, I think you're past the point of being reasonable. You've already been fair and reasonable since I've been on this board. Now to have people that are just not complying with job requirements that be set forth, not only leads me to believe that they were unresponsive for unknown reasons, as Mr. White alluded to, but I think we're past the point of the wait and see, and we'll work it out. You guys, my personal opinion, you really need to go, especially with the payables and setting
you need to be in compliance immediately. It's not even a question. Just Timothy just mentioned this by state statute and law. So,
Actually, it's IRS, excuse me. W-9.
Yeah.
well, you need W-9s. There's not even a question whether you should be getting W-9s. And what I've heard is that we're writing checks to people without the proper documentation. That just sounds like a recipe for failure.
No, which, I'm sorry, what was the
Checks with
Im-
documentation.
improper documentation? I'm not sure what that was about.
Didn't Frank mention that there were vendors being set up without W-9s and specific?
Yes, there are a number of vendors in the system right now that have no tax ID number attached to them. I can only assume, I can only assume that a W-9 was not acquired when those vendors were set up. I changed that practice back in December. So.
Have the department that's been compliant?
Yes, they have, because a lot of them were unhappy because the payments were delayed, but vendors were not set up without a W-9. And I think what they began to realize was most, if not all companies, have W-9s ready to go, just as the city does. As soon as someone asks for it, you print it out, you sign it, and you send it. So, you know, since December, we have not had any significant problems getting W-9s from anyone who's requesting a new vendor setup.
I see Ms. Shaw's hand is raised.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I share the exasperation expressed by members of the subcommittee. And as I understand the role of the MARB and of the subcommittee, it's not just oversight, nor is it just setting criteria for the award of restructuring grants. It is the affirmative kind of intervention that we've endeavored to do over the last year and a half. And I question, and perhaps this is more rhetorical, not for action or further discussion, although I'd be interested to hear what the sentiment is, but perhaps a more robust intervention is required. If in fact basic standards around financial controls are not in place, haven't been in place, I mean, perhaps this needs to take on an increased level of participation by the MARB.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
I would echo Christine's remarks there. You know, my recollection is that we talked about this issue with the purchase orders and telling departments that they were no longer going to get paid on these things. We were told that that was resolved. They were not getting paid a year ago. I think, Frank, that was one of the first things you said when you were coming in. And so here there's been all this pushback. I think we as a board should think about how we can empower and strengthen the mayor and Frank's hand in telling these departments that this is the rule. There is no allowance for pushback. These purchasers will not get paid regardless, unless they go through the proper procedure.
Thank you, Matt. Other discussion?
Well, this is Mark. I came on a little late. I apologize. I think the forensic audit is going to give us a picture of the past and the present. And in concurrence with Christine Shaw's comment, if that picture is such that there's further intervention needed by the state on MARB or some other procedure in order to get this done quickly and competently and forthrightly, as well as show the accountability and transparency that's necessary. And I think MARB needs to have that discussion after the forensic audit turns up its final result. But I do think that all parties probably should be aware that if in fact a forensic audit does show significant deficiencies where there needs to be intervention by us, that we should be prepared to do so. Because I do agree that the 3 years that I've been involved here, all the goodwill that West Haven has put forward through elected officials and appointed officials seems to be stymied because of systemic policies and procedures that people have held closely that they just don't want to abandon. Well, be that as it may, they will be abandoned if in fact it is necessary for the greater good. Now, if they're abandoned, if they need to be abandoned with us intervening, so be it. If the elected officials and the appointed officials can't do it for whatever reason, then concurrence in this show, I think it's necessary for us to consider intervening if it's necessary.
Thank you, Mark. Mayor and the West Haven team, I think you've heard the sentiment of the MARB very loud and clear. I want to be clear on the public record that this board has recognized progress from a financial nature that West Haven has made, and very specifically to shift itself to a financial model where starting at fiscal 22, you are not relying on municipal restructuring funds. That does not mean that the necessary work to strengthen your internal financial infrastructure must not mean that has to accompany the financial progress in order for it to be sustainable. So thank you all today for your feedback. We will be following up through the forensic audit, and depending on the outcome of that audit, we'll have further discussion on what next steps would be required. With that, we will turn to the last item for West Haven today. It is the September 2021 monthly financial report, which is reflected in the meeting materials, and I will turn it over for Frank to get any overview.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you have the financial report in front of you. One thing you will notice is on the revenue page, we have reflected the additional pilot monies that were assigned to West Haven and have been received by West Haven. So that is reflected there. You'll also note that there is a negative revenue in miscellaneous parks and recreation, negative $76,000. When I dug into that, what we found was that West Haven had a policy this year whereby any resident who had paid for summer camp or summer activities was actually reimbursed for that. Those reimbursements were recorded as part of fiscal 22, when in fact the revenues were recorded as fiscal 21. I had spoken to the accounting department, and entry has been prepared, so that will be cleaned up for the October report. Other than that, revenues continue to be as projected. We are seeing some increases in the building permits, which is actually nice to see. Tax revenues are coming in, so we're not seeing any issues there. I'm starting to do a deep dive into some of the overtime expenditures. We're seeing overtime come in not quite as heavy as last year, because last year was the pandemic, but you can see that we're already at roughly 30% of the budget for the year, and we haven't even gotten into vacation and holiday seasons yet. So I'm doing a deep dive on that. Other than that, other expenses, we are starting to get some controls around. We have developed some new processes for getting the utilities paid timely. We had in the past seen several month lag in electricity bills and sanitation bills, which made forecasting extremely difficult. So we've put together some processes internally. Once the new AP person is in, I can pass that off to him or her. Unfortunately, at the moment, I'm still kind of doing that along with everything else as we try to keep the wheels on the cart here. I have not changed any expenditure projections yet for the year. I would expect the October report, once I have a full 4 months, I should be able to extrapolate out where we're going based on, as I have in the past, using a 3-year timing algorithm for each department and account. I should be able to project out where we're going. So as of right now, the general fund, we're projecting to be $1.4 million surplus, and again, that is because of the additional pilot funds that came through but were not budgeted for. The sewer department is the same situation. We have revenues are coming through as expected. There are no additional pilot revenues in the sewer fund. So at this point, the projection for the year is on budget. Allentown, however, is the recipient of those additional funds. So you'll note that we are projecting at this point a $700,000 surplus based entirely on those additional revenues that came to West Haven but were not known in time for the budget process. At that point, Madam Secretary, I'll take any questions that the board may have.
Thank you, Frank. I do not have any questions, but I want to just flag the additional pilot funds received and the fact that you have a $1.4 million surplus. Clearly, there are resources available to meet any staffing needs to support the compliance issues. And Frank, as I listened to you give your report out, you've always done a great job here. I wanted to and talk about what's on your plate. I also want to make sure that you are addressing to MARB through the mayor whether or not you have the proper support to implement the expectations of MARB on the finance function.
Thank you.
With that, open it up.
Secretary, it's Kim.
Yes, ma'am.
One other thing, it's not just the expectations of MARB. Frank is also going to be going through an annual audit as well as the forensic audit, and so that is adding more to his plate. And so I think that there need additional support of another finance structure person that would be somebody that Frank could then help rely on and help him resolve all these findings so that they can get in front of this. And if they do not think that they're going to complete their audit on time at the end of this year, that he has the support he needs so he could complete the audit. The sooner they can complete their regular annual audit rather than delaying it will also be hurtful to him with the delay.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd ask that you please ensure that those needs are met and that they're sent to the MARB so we're aware of them so the city has the support necessary. Other discussion, please.
Right, Patty, regarding the overtime, so I know the issue came up a couple months ago about some overtime that was given to, department heads, whoever else, through some of the COVID money. Was that overtime in the previous fiscal year?
Yes, sir, it was.
Okay, and are those same positions, the Commissioner of Public Works and other folks who got overtime, have they incurred, how much overtime is, I guess the positions that got paid overtime last year, the ones who were the subject of a little bit of headlines in the newspaper, things like that were kind of the higher ups or actually exempt employees under the law. How much overtime has, say, the Commissioner of Public Works, those folks incurred this year?
They have not been paid any, as of this point, they have not been paid any additional funds in this year.
Okay. So with that, this is a paid, any department head, deputy department head, whoever got paid that overtime outside of your, cops, fire, those folks, so the Commissioner of Public Works, whoever was the personnel director, whoever got that as far as a more executive branch employee, what I'd like to know is over the last 5 years, what those individual positions, what their overtime earnings were, which they were compensated with, which they were paid for. Just to figure out the consistency with the fiscal year 21 compensation.
I will look into that for you, sir.
Secretary, that is also part of the statement of work with the forensic audit.
That's great, and I'm requesting it because the forensic audit is a public document. I want it provided. I don't need to wait for an audit to do it. So
The entire MARB will receive the backup documentation. The one distinguishing factor from what Pat is requesting is a comparison to, a few prior years to see if there was a consistent trend or did it pop due to COVID-related activity. That might not be covered in the forensic audit again, so we'll want to make sure that we go back, we look back. But duly noted, Pat, and we'll make sure that it's completed and provided to all members.
thank you.
You're welcome. Other discussion on the West Haven monthly financial report?
Madam Chair, this is Frank. Just a quick comment for the record, I guess you would say, is that I personally would welcome any assistance that the MARB can give to ensure that we're able to make the changes that are required here in the city.
Pat, can you please repeat that?
No, that was Frank.
That's Frank. Oh, Frank, can you please repeat that?
Yes, I was just saying that I personally would appreciate any assistance that the MARB could give if I run into any sort of reluctance to make the changes needed around the financial controls.
You will have our support. I believe I can speak on behalf of this board that you will have our support.
Thank you.
Great. Seeing that there's no other discussion pertaining to David's financial report, thank you for being the day mayor. Thank you for Frank for your responsiveness. We are going to move on to the city purpose.